welcome to Our City Matters. Now, we know it's Our City Matters, although today we're going to be talking about education, and we know, that I did a show on education matters, which is dear to my heart. However, today we have Victoria Sullivan with us, and she will be talking about some House bills. Victoria is a state rep for Ward 9 in Manchester, so she'll be talking in terms of how these House bills and Senate bills relate to Manchester as best she can. Hi, Victoria.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good. I'm glad you're here with me.
Me too. It's been a while.
And bringing all this info to me and to the viewers. So we only have a half hour, folks, so we'll get right to it. House Bill 276.
276.
And then we'll move into Senate Bill 101, which is similar.
Yes.
And then a bill that you sponsored is 276 on parental consent for non-academic surveys.
Okay. That's 206, I think.
I'm sorry. It's 206.
That's
I'm
all
sorry.
right.
Yes,
I can't keep
you're
track of all the numbers either. There's so many bills coming before us that have to do with Common Core and Smarter Balance. It's certainly a concern for our constituents.
It is. And so now the people need to know about Senate Bill 101.
Right.
And I call that a people's bill. The people of New Hampshire that have a concern with Common Core.
Right. So, like you said, there's two bills. There's House Bill 276 and there's Senate Bill 101, both having to do with the district's right to not have to implement Common Core. They both basically say that the state cannot force a district to implement Common Core. However,
the difference is.
However, if the state has adopted Smarter Balance assessment, the only standards that the schools are going to be able to use is Common Core, because otherwise they're not testing on what they're teaching.
Right. Which is also in state law, that the statewide assessment must go with what the children are being taught.
Right. So it's going to be interesting to see how Wakefield comes out of this, because they're the only ones that stood firm, and they're not using the Common Core standards. They're using the Massachusetts state standards that were developed by Dr. Stotsky, which have been undeniably determined to be the best in the country, because Massachusetts did hold the top education standards in the country. Until they went to Common Core, now they're seeing their numbers fall. So House Bill 101, the Senate Bill 101, basically just states that Common Core state standards developed jointly by the National Governors Association Center for Best Practice and the Council of Chief State School Officers shall not be required by the Department of Education or the State Board of Education to be implemented in any school or school district in the state. That's basically all that it says. So when you compare that to House Bill 276, it goes with RSA 541, but it says, nor shall the state board formally or informally adopt a policy or guideline that requires a school district or any public school to implement or participate in the Common Core state standards. So far, we're pretty close. If a school board elects not to implement or participate in Common Core state standards or any other minimum educational standards adopted by the state board pursuant to RSA 541A, so even outside of Common Core, if they come down with another set of standards that they don't call Common Core, the district does not have to adopt them. However, this was a however, if a school board elects not to implement or participate in the Common Core state standards or any other minimum education standards adopted by the state board through the state board policy or guidelines for all grades in public schools, the school board shall adopt and implement standards that meet or exceed those standards. And the body that will decide whether they meet or exceed those standards are the Department of Education. So you're still under the thumb of the Department of Education, and this is not local control.
This is not.
Where Senate Bill 101 really doesn't have that fallback where you have to go back to the Department of Education.
For permission.
For permission.
Right.
So, similar, yet not.
Not at all. Senate Bill 101 is the people's bill. I believe HB 276 is the DOE's, or New Hampshire DOE's bill, and they get to pull all the strings and determine all of it.
Right.
So if if they determine that the Massachusetts standards, which are #1 in the country, are not meeting the minimum standards for New Hampshire, because New Hampshire has Common Core.
Right.
But if they don't like the standards for some reason, and they nitpick it and say, no, doesn't meet the minimum requirements for New Hampshire minimum standards, well, guess what, Wakefield? You're out of luck.
Right. Well, and the Senate bill also has a checks and balances that's not included in House Bill 276. And this is, as the law stands currently, that the Board of Education shall provide written notice to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the President of the Senate, and the chairs of the House and Senate Education Committees of any changes to the school approval standards adopted pursuant to RSA 541A. So that's something that did not happen with Common Core standards, and that's something that people, I think Anne-Marie Banfield's been very vocal about, that these standards are supposed to come through your legislation before it becomes part of your school district, and they did not. So this keeps that check in place.
Right. So right now, the standards have been adopted by the New Hampshire DOE.
Yes.
Through the state school board.
Yes.
And so it seems like it's having the same force and effect of law.
Yes.
Which the rules are not law. The rules are rules, but it hasn't been law. So now they want to put it into law.
And when the Department
The
of
standard.
Education comes before us, because they have lobbyists that come before us to speak, and they will tell us that these laws are unnecessary because they cannot force districts currently to use Common Core. However, they have Smarter Balance as the state test, and Smarter Balance in the new No Child Left Behind waiver.
It's there. Right.
Smarter Balance is actually stated as the test, and that waiver will commit us to this for the next 4 years. So they no longer say a state assessment test. They state that it will be the Smarter Balance assessment, regardless of the fact that parents are opting their children out of it, and that it's been shown to have failures, and that the consumer is saying, we don't want this. They've just made a commitment with our federal government to use this.
Incredible.
It is incredible, and your tax dollars pay for all of this.
Incredible. You must be spinning your head
I
over there
am.
at the House Education Committee.
We have had some good bills pass. We have had some. Unfortunately, we find ourselves having to legislate parental control, and that's not a good place for this country to be in. But that's where we're at, and we have passed some good bills that bring into law your right as a parent, and we have passed some good bills for the kids. This stuff is very frustrating for me to deal with because I see the consequences of Common Core in action, in play, in the schools. And what I find is that some other people that speak on behalf of Common Core pretty much use sound bites, and they're not talking to people that have boots on the ground. They're not speaking with the children. They're not speaking with the teachers.
And the parents.
They're using these little catchphrases like critical thinking and rigorous standards, and that's all they really are. They're not seeing the outcome of this. And in Manchester, in order for them to justify that they're aligning to Common Core, our kids are being tested constantly. There's been very little learning going on in school this year. We've had teachers that are frustrated. They've come forward at school board meetings and saying the testing it's too much. The kids are frustrated, they're upset, and I'm getting ready to retire. And then a math teacher came forward and said, these math standards are unacceptable, and I'm retiring. So how many good teachers do we have to lose that are willing to stand up for our kids before people really get angry and show up at the school board meetings and say enough is enough? Because it's the same 5 of us all the time. We need to have parents come forward and say enough is enough.
You have children in the schools.
I do.
And you see the outfall or the fallout and,
Yep.
and what your kids are bringing home and how they're feeling. They don't want to go to school. When kids get so discouraged and frustrated that they just say, I don't want to go to school, something's wrong at school.
Right. And we have these students that come before, and parents that come before us, the House Education Committee, and say these same things. And you have the same, luckily we're in the majority there, but we have the same people voting for the kids' rights and for the parents and against Common Core. And then you have that same group that will always vote in favor of Common Core no matter what is being said to them. We had a teenager that came before us, and she was saying that she was a grade A student. She took the AP courses. She always pushed herself, and now with the new math, she's lost. She's like, I don't know what they expect me to do because this math is so confusing. She said, I've always been a straight A student, and now my little brother's coming to me for help, and I can't help him with his math because it's so confusing. So this isn't critical thinking. This is something completely different. We're not teaching our kids to think. We're training them to just do what they're told to do.
It's just incredible. I wish more engineers would take a look at this and give their opinions, because if these children are in fact going to be going into the workforce, since this Common Core is workforce training, and the engineers that are there now say, if they look at this and say, you know what, we're going to have some crazy kids coming in here and working in our companies.
Which, how sad is this? That's where we're at. We're just training our kids to work. We're not training them to think. We're not training them to be creative. We're not training them to think outside the box. We're just training them to go there and do exactly what they're told, even though it doesn't make sense. This math doesn't make sense, but do it anyway, because that's what you're told to do. And that's
we
where
thought
we're at.
long division was hard. They have long addition.
Yes, they do. Yes,
Long
they
addition,
do.
right?
Yep, and you can't add
All the little boxes.
you can't add 7 plus 8 to get 15 anymore. 7 plus 8 becomes 10 7 plus 8 is 15, but you have to take 7 plus 8, make the 8 into a 10, make the 7 into a 5, so that now 10 plus 5 is 15.
Yeah.
Because that's, way less confusing than just learning that 7 plus 8 is 15.
That's certainly not what I do at the grocery store when I add up my what I'm buying.
Can you imagine?
I make a long list and then I, add up.
It's
I don't know what.
it is very frustrating, and I'm hoping that the more that we speak about it, the more people will come forward and say this is an unacceptable practice for my children.
It's not normal, and it's not good for our children. So parents, when your child comes home and says, this is ridiculous, I'm not going back to school, this is stupid.
Right.
And usually it's the kids in the older grades that are, because the young kids, they have no clue what's.
Well, what's going to happen is the good teachers are going to retire because this is too frustrating and this isn't why they signed up to teach, and they're not able to teach any longer. They're just, going to college isn't even necessary anymore. Just come out of high school and let them train you as to what kind of a technician they want you to be in the classroom. But you're going to have new teachers coming in that don't know any better. And they will just do exactly what they're told to do by the system, and they're not going to think anything of it. And then the kids won't think anything of it, and now we've got a culture of non-thinkers.
Right. Well, I hope SB 101 passes, and I hope it gives the freedom to the districts to choose and to challenge the Smarter Balance Assessment, to challenge the waiver that our Commissioner, Virginia Berry, is signing with the federal government.
Right. People need to contact their legislators, though, because we do listen, and you need to let people know that you're paying attention and that you want better for your kids.
And how can they contact you, Victoria?
I am available you can get any of us through the New Hampshire court website, New Hampshire General Court. It's www.generalcourt.something New Hampshire. But if you start putting it in, you'll find it. And all of your legislators are there, your state senators, your state representatives. It's broken down by committee. You can find out who's on education, who's on finance, because I think one of these goes to finance. And start there and just become involved. And you can see all the bills that are coming forward, too. All the information you need to participate in this process is available on that website.
And they can call you.
They can call me anytime. 232-4382. This is my home number, and I do return phone calls.
Okay, and your phone number is on the General Court
yep,
website.
as is my email address.
For State Rep.
Yep.
That's Ward 9 in Manchester. And, I mean, we could go on with more angles of these bills that we're just talking about, but you do have a bill that you sponsored.
We do. I have a couple. My prime bill that I sponsored, I co-sponsored a couple, is House Bill 332, which requires schools to give parental notification to anything to do with sex ed or sexual human reproduction.
Okay.
And that
332.
passed the House. I just presented it to the Senate Education Committee. I think it was received well. And I'm hoping it goes through the Senate because that's, again, we're legislating parental rights. But
Parental consent.
yeah.
and
Yeah.
that the parent will be notified of any content that is sexual in nature.
And they'll have the opportunity to review that material and then make a decision whether that's appropriate for their child or not.
Okay, well, that's a good.
Yeah.
And hopefully
think
that
it's
will
a common
pass
sense one.
the whole House and the Senate, and hopefully the governor will sign it.
It went down party lines in
Oh,
my committee, right down
call the
party
governor.
lines.
Let her know.
Yep.
And the other bill is another parental consent
206, the survey bill, yes.
for all these surveys that the
Right.
children are taking.
So again, that would require parental permission prior to the surveys.
So at least the parent can see the survey,
Right.
hopefully beforehand, and get an idea of what the content is.
We
and
had an issue in Bedford last year, and now we just had an issue in Manchester.
the risk survey.
And personally, I don't think it's anyone's business. You know, these surveys, the information that's on these surveys, I don't think kids answer correctly anyway. They're not honest on them. A child that's having sex or doing drugs isn't going to say it in a survey, and a child that wants to look cool is going to say they're doing it on a survey. When this bill came up in our committee, Representative Boehm, is a very funny man. He said when we took these surveys in high school, the results came out, and 90% of the boys were having sex with only 10% of the girls. So,
Yes.
you know, they're not truthful anyway, but
That's a freshman, that they're taking freshman year.
right.
And maybe, who
And
knows
some of
when
the questions are, have you ever sniffed glue to get high? Well, if you didn't know you could sniff glue to get high,
Right,
well, now you know.
It's a teaching tool.
Right. And there were other questions on there that, frankly, the school needs to get out of this business. I'm sure they make some money off of these survey companies coming in, but let's get back to teaching,
Exactly.
plain and simple.
Because that took a whole period to take the risk
45
assessment.
minutes.
That was long.
Yeah.
How many questions? It was like 100?
Yeah,
It's crazy.
it is crazy.
And-
And it's not like it changes anything. It's not like they say, oh, we've got a drug problem here at Manchester West, and so we're going to bring these counselors into the doors and treat this. Nothing happens. Nothing happens from these surveys.
Well, Planned Parenthood really wants some of this information
Oh, I'm sure they do.
so that they can solicit or target certain populations or send home or have some kind of informational in-service in school for a certain population of the kids.
Again, we need to get back to teaching.
Yes. Math, reading.
Let parents parent, and let's get back to the schools just teaching.
Right. Well, on the 20th, I'll go on to another announcement here. On the 26th of April, there is a presentation by Dr. Duke Pesta and Anne-Marie Banfield in Epping, New Hampshire. And John will put up on the screen the poster announcing this presentation. And
There it is.
yes, and Dr. Duke Pesta, very informative about the effects of big government education and all of the nuances that are involved. And of course, parents are fed up, and they don't want their children to be treated as human capital by the stakeholders. Parents are not stakeholders, by the way, in this big government agenda for making our children workforce ready. Or, I mean, there's a limit. When you start workforce education or college and career ready in kindergarten, you know something's wrong with this picture.
Right.
Let the children be children for as long as they can be.
Well, they want to start it earlier than that because we decided a bill that came before us. They want to start with preschool. They want your children from the womb and to start training them to be who they want them to be. And people really need to start taking back control. Parents need to step up and say, I'm the parent. This isn't happening any longer. I think for a time, we learned to trust the schools, and we learned to give over a certain amount of responsibility to them. And now it's swung so far the other way that they have more control than parents do, and parents are asking permission. We had, was it Parkside? I had there was an email put up on the Manchester Parents Against Common Core page where a parent was having a problem getting their child opted out of the Smarter Balance test. Yet again, even though we went before the school board, we had the letter that was sent home to the parents from each school, and yet we still have a parent who's saying that their school is giving their child a hard time. In Bedford, I received information from a parent that they were refusing to let the children opt out of the test. They were telling them there was no opt-out. They could not
Even if
opt
their
out.
parent
Yes.
sent the letter.
Yes. And when they were
refusing.
returned, if they were out of school when they were returned, they would be forced to take the test.
So totally disregard
Complete disregard for
for the
parental
parents'
rights.
Right. Well, we
You
can
know.
talk more about parental rights, I guess, another time. But so the Dr. Duke Pesta presentation is important,
It is.
and that's being put on by the Republican committee in the greater Seacoast area,
And
or the greater Epping area,
And you can-
Epping, New Hampshire.
You can search him on YouTube to see what he's about and see some previous conversations that he's had.
There's
He's
videos there.
fantastic. Lots of
Yeah,
information.
exactly, and he gives so much information on Common Core, the pitfalls and
Right.
the things that are not good.
And we were discussing this, if even to meet the minimum standards, because I believe I've seen him speak to this point as well. In the lower grades, the standards have been deemed developmentally inappropriate, which doesn't mean that they're too hard for the kids or they're helping them to be critical thinkers. It means that their brains are not developed to be able to do critical thinking yet. They're hands-on. If you spend any time with kids K through 3, you know they learn hands-on very well. They can't think in an abstract manner. That's why they have a hard time differentiating between what's real and what isn't real, because it's all one thing to them still. So when we talk about in this bill that they have to meet the minimum standards, well, if the minimum standards are deemed developmentally inappropriate and you meet them or exceed them, they're still developmentally inappropriate.
Right,
They're still not good.
right.
So, yeah, and he
Right.
spoke to that
That's
at
very,
one point.
very dangerous. We have the psychologist, Dr. Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
You can Google Dr. Thompson. What's his first name? I forget his
I don't
first name.
remember.
Dr. Thompson, psychologist, child psychologist, is absolutely,
There have been several
Against.
that have come out and spoken against
yeah.
the
And
standards.
other child psychologists say totally inappropriate. So what does a parent do then? I mean, you're dependent on the public schools.
Homeschooling's looking better and better. Well, I think you put the article, they're starting to have these mini homeschool academies, which I think it's a great idea. If you've got a few parents, they can put in time and start these community homeschools and start educating your kids that way, because they're going to be the leaders in our society. If you go to private school or you are homeschooled,
Right.
or if you're fortunate enough to get into a charter school, all the other kids are going to be left behind. I hate to say it, but this is where we're headed.
Well, workforce education compared to liberal arts education, there's a big difference.
Big difference.
I believe, and I'm going to say it right out, that the Common Core workforce education puts a child back on the plantation, because he only gets to learn what he needs to learn to do his job.
Right.
And the child who's in a private school or a school that's not using Common Core, not all private schools don't use Common Core, so you need to check on that, but they will get the liberal arts education. They will have wider choices in life. They won't be relegated to the community college, basically. And I'm saying, community college is fine for certain students,
Right.
but not all students should be trained to get
No.
a certificate or an associate's degree.
No.
Okay? But we're going to see statistics as it goes. It's unfortunate that there's going to be collateral damage
Absolutely.
with Common Core, and some students are just going to be devastated when they figure out my education.
Parents are going to be devastated when they realize
Well, when the
it's too
child's
late.
in 12th grade and they thought Johnny was going to go to an Ivy League school, and no, because the Ivy League school's not picking from public schools. They're picking from the elite schools.
Right. And so this country of ours, and our live free or die state, in the younger grades especially, we should be letting the kids explore who they are. We should be helping them discover their own God-given talents and abilities, the things that make them individuals, which are the things that make this country great, which is the reason people move here from China and Russia, so they can be who God intended them to be. And here we are telling them that they all have to be the same. And forget about, creative writing or creative things in your life. This is, you're just going to follow these lines.
There's
That's
one
it.
standard, and everyone will meet
Right.
the standard, or you will be remediated over and over to meet that standard.
Kindergarten used to be your introduction to school, your introduction to socialization, because most kids, well, when I grew up, I didn't have preschool. Kindergarten was your first step in education, and it was playtime, and it was creative, and there was music, and now it's you need to learn how to read and write before you get out of kindergarten, and that's it.
So they're sitting at desks,
Oh.
or they're sitting on the mat
Yeah,
for
There's a lot of
hours on
sitting.
end, and
Full day now too, full day kindergarten. My kids had half day kindergarten, which I thought it was fantastic, and now this year, the whole school is full day.
yeah, it's just totally disadvantaged. Children are disadvantaged in a new way now.
Right. They don't get to be kids anymore.
No.
Let's put them straight to work.
Right. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit here, Victoria. Are there any other bills? We did
Well,
the surveys.
We had Senate Bill 195 that passed our committee. And this is encouraging instruction in cursive writing and memorization
Right.
of multiplication
the
tables.
cursive writing
Because
bill.
it's one of the many things the Common Core is lacking. And we had lengthy discussions about this. And what I find so funny in my committee is when people speak about local control, it does not mean the same things to both parties. So, for my party, I'm a Republican, so for our party, local control means me, the parent, or the local school district. Local control seems to not mean that to the other party. And anything that so this, they said they could not back this bill because it was telling the school districts what they had to do, and they wanted local control. However, when it comes to the Common Core bills, they won't back those either, because the Department of Education should be able to say what the standards are. So, it doesn't work out both
Right.
ways. But this bill, I think, is a great bill, because it's one of those things that I wish wasn't necessary, but it is.
Right.
And if our kids can't read in cursive writing, they can't read our Constitution. They can't read the Declaration of Independence.
Well, they can't look at historical
They
documents.
can't read the letters
Well-
to the founding fathers
Well,
to each other.
Victoria, unfortunately, we have to wrap up on that note, but you'll come again and let us know how these bills turn out.
I will.
Okay? And so hopefully we'll get cursive writing back in the schools. Parents, look, ask your child. You must know if they're practicing cursive or not.
Right.
All right, we'll see you next time, folks, on Our City Matters. Take care.